From Washington, D.C., the Department of the Army proudly presents the Jazz Ambassadors Inside the Big Band. This 19-piece big band has appeared in all 50 states, Canada, Mexico, Japan, India, and throughout Europe in concerts and clinics, radio and television programs, and major music festivals. Their festival performances include the Montreux, North Sea, Toronto, and Newport Jazz Festivals. As part of an ongoing series of instructional videos by the United States Army Field Band, Inside the Big Band contains information on styles and techniques for jazz bands of any level. Now, here's the director of the Jazz Ambassadors, Chief Warrant Officer Kevin Laird.
Hi, and welcome to Inside the Big Band. The big band, as we know it today, evolved from the jazz groups of the Dixieland era back in the early 1900s, which often featured a front line of trumpet, trombone, and clarinet, playing a spirited, loosely organized kind of group improvisation. By the early 30s, jazz bands started getting larger, and the three horns on the front line grew into three sections: trumpets, bones, and reeds. As the bands got bigger, the music had to be more carefully organized, and the group improvisation of the Dixieland style gave way to swing arrangements by musicians like Don Redman, Fletcher Henderson, and Benny Moten. In the 30s and 40s, swing was the thing, and big bands dominated the music scene. Back then, the instrumentation varied wildly from band to band. This was partly a marketing thing, as each band tried to create its own trademark kind of a sound. But it was also about money. The more popular a band leader was, the more money he could charge. So the size of the band showed off the status of its leader. Anyway, whatever their instrumentation, the first generation of big bands was all about playing swing music for dancers. The big band repertoire has developed a lot since the 30s, but our musical values remain exactly the same: to make the music swing and to provide a vehicle for creative improvisation. We've divided our presentation into 4 sections. In Part 1, we'll look at the mechanics of musical styles. In Part 2, we'll demonstrate embellishments and special effects. Part 3, putting it all together, looks at how to get the best results from each section and how to bring the sections together to get a great big band sound. Finally, Part 4 presents an introduction to jazz improvisation. Our chief arranger, Sergeant First Class Vince Norman, has written a chart called Porch Swingin' to help you apply the lessons in this video. We've also prepared a companion booklet. You can download Porch Swingin' and the booklet from our website and print them out whenever you want. We put a lot of information in this video, and you're going to hear a lot about the importance of listening. In order to play this music with confidence and authority, you have to know what it's supposed to sound like. You have to have heard the music played by the pros. The time you spend listening to jazz greats will not only make you a better musician, it'll be fun too. So start going through records at the library. Check out your local retailers. Ask people you know if they have any jazz recordings you could listen to. You might even want to get a turntable to play old records, because a lot of great big band albums haven't been released on CD. And by all means, listen to live jazz whenever you get the chance. That includes coming to hear the Jazz Ambassadors when we're in your area. We hope you enjoy Inside the Big Band. Now, let's get on with the show. In this section of the video, we'll focus on the musical styles most common to the big band. We'll begin with swing, then Latin and Brazilian, and end with funk.
The swing style took America by storm in the 1930s and 40s. It reached virtually every segment of American culture because it was fun, had lots of energy, and most importantly, it made people want to dance. So let's take a look at how we create this swing feel. Focus on the ride cymbal, hi-hat, and string bass. With the drums, it's important to emphasize the ride cymbal and hi-hat while backing off the snare and kick drum. Also on the ride cymbal, notice how the upbeats of 2 and 4 push toward beats 1 and 3. This provides momentum, which gives us some of that energy that makes swing so much fun to listen to. Now to the bass. The strong, steady quarter notes line up perfectly with the ride cymbal and the hi-hat on beats 2 and 4. This groove in the bass and drums is the backbone of the swing style. Once the groove is set up, it's up to the rest of the band to make their parts fit inside this feel. Usually when reading medium swing music, eighth notes are swung, like do-da-do-da-do-da-do, while quarter notes and tied pairs of eighth notes are played short unless marked long. Here's an example. You might have noticed that the quarter notes on beats 2 and 4 were played with more emphasis, and that the ends of groups of eighth notes were short and accented. These are also standard characteristics of swing. There are so many of these kinds of rules and interpretations that the best way to learn what to do is to listen to as many big band recordings from different eras as you can. And then when somebody says to play in the style of Count Basie, Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, or Glenn Miller, you'll have a really good grasp of what they want.
Let's move on to the shuffle. A shuffle is another form of swing. For the drums and guitar, it means minor adjustments to the basic swing pattern. Notice the eighth notes in the drummer's left hand on the snare drum. Also notice how beats 2 and 4 are slightly accented while beats 1 and 3 are softer. A variation of this pattern has the hi-hat playing all of the upbeats instead of beats 2 and 4. Another kind of shuffle is the rock shuffle, also called a roadhouse shuffle. The pattern is the same except that the drummer's right hand plays on a slightly open hi-hat, accenting all quarter notes. This type of shuffle has a more raucous sound.
Now that you're starting to understand the swing feel, we're going to slow the tempo down and show how this changes things. A swing ballad is challenging because every person in the band has to think the same way or it won't be together. In other words, you need to subdivide the rhythmic pulse through the whole chart. This can be hard at first, but the rhythm section can give the band clues on where or actually when to play the notes. To demonstrate, our drummer will now play the subdivision. Now he'll take away the crutches, and we'll see if we can all keep it going on in our heads. When this happens, remember to listen closely to the rhythm section. Even though the drummer has stopped playing the subdivision, the rhythm section is still providing some clues about where the subdivisions are.
As we're sure you've noticed, the eighth notes in the swing feel are played with a triplet feel. Notice as the saxophone section demonstrates the swing eighth notes at a slow tempo. The eighth notes straighten out as the tempo increases. Listen to what happens each time they speed it up. The eighth notes will almost completely even out by the time the tempo is half note equals 144. This is when articulation and accents become very important for keeping it swinging. A basic rule to follow is to accent the tops of lines and the first note after a change in the direction of the line. Here's the lead alto part to this sax solo with the accents written in the appropriate places. You may want to mark your parts at first to remind yourself, but eventually the accents will become second nature.
The next selection is a jazz waltz written by Vince Norman entitled Goodbye, Mr. Schultz. There's really no difference in feel from a regular swing chart except that it's in 3 instead of 4.
The next two categories cover the most common forms of Latin music played by big bands. The first, Afro-Cuban music, includes the cha-cha, salsa, and the 6/8 Afro-Cuban. The second group of Latin styles is from Brazil, with roots in Africa as well. We'll play examples of the samba and the bossa nova. The differences between these styles are found in the rhythm section, mostly with the bass and drums. For each style, we'll show you the patterns being played. For some of the styles, we'll show possibilities for Latin percussion. Percussionists should keep in mind that their role is a supportive one. Rhythmic patterns need to be assigned for each percussion instrument in order to achieve a good, uncluttered groove. Resist the temptation to just grab something out of the percussion box and start banging on it. Horn players, listen to the way the rhythm section plays the eighth notes in these examples. The eighth notes in your parts should feel the same.
Next is a Cuban style called the cha-cha. The cha-cha is a popular dance style at medium tempo. It has a very distinct feel and rhythmic pattern.
Afro-Cuban music in the mid to late 20th century was coined salsa because it combined many different musical ingredients. Its origins stem from Africa by way of Cuba as a style called son. Developed further in New York City, it's become popular around the world. It's important to note that in salsa, the bass player almost always anticipates rather than plays the downbeats, a rhythm referred to as tumbao. Here's the rhythm section demonstrating a basic salsa pattern. Here's part of a salsa composition by Sergeant Major Gene Thorne called Layover in San Juan.
The Afro-Cuban 6/8 originated in West and Central Africa. It is distinguished by a repeated syncopated rhythm played over a triplet foundation. This kind of music was actually the forefather of swing.
From Brazil, the samba is another popular dance style. It came from the streets of Rio de Janeiro during Carnival, and it has a lively dance feel.
Our second Brazilian style is the bossa nova. Bossa nova is Portuguese for new trend. This style was created by changing a samba into something a little slower, softer, and more relaxed.
The rhythm and blues style of the 1950s and 60s developed into the funk style of the 70s. It continued to progress to what's now called hip-hop. You might not think that there's much connection between what you hear on the radio and jazz swing, but listen and you'll notice that they both have that same swing feel. Now, there's also straight funk, which is more closely related to rock than swing because it doesn't have that swing feel. Here's part of Sergeant Major Gene Thorne's Surfin' the Net, played first as a straight funk and then as a shuffle funk or hip-hop.
Over the years, big band writers have developed a pretty unique vocabulary of special effects. Let's look at how to play some of them.
Outside the jazz band, you'd rarely use the tongue to stop the airstream, but it's actually the norm when playing big band music. The tongue stop produces a hard, precise cutoff. Dot, 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 dot. On the saxophone, simply put the tongue to the reed, abruptly stopping the airflow and vibration. For the brass, seal off the airflow by putting the tip of the tongue to the spot where normal tonguing occurs. The tongue stop is generally not appropriate in soft legato passages or for the cutoff of a soft fermata.
For the trumpet, a lot of the special effects involve partially depressing the valves, which is called using half valves. This enables the player to slide between notes. When you first try this, you'll notice that the sound is softer and less centered, so you have to add extra air to compensate. You might need to experiment to determine which valves to depress and just how far. Most of the time, your music won't indicate when to use half valves, so you have to listen and practice.
The fall is one of the most common effects found in written music for the big band. This effect involves playing the note and falling off of it. Bow. The fall then ends at a specific time, but without landing on a specific note or pitch. The short fall occurs on notes with a duration of 1 beat or less. For reeds, the short fall is created by slightly retracting the jaw. The trombones play the note, then slur down with the lips while moving the slide outward. Trumpets establish the pitch, then slur down with the lips. You can also partially depress the valves while descending. Here are several ways that you may see the short fall written. Usually the shape of the mark will suggest how long the short fall should be played. The long fall generally occurs on notes longer than 1 beat. For reeds, the long fall is a descending chromatic slur which fades out toward the bottom. For the brass instruments, the long fall is executed the same as the short fall. Due to its longer duration, the beginnings and release points of the long fall must be clearly understood or clearly marked on the part. The rule of thumb for the long fall is to hold the note for the first half of the note's value, then fall for the second half of the note's value, or hold half, fall half. In order for the fall to be heard, blow. Otherwise, the effect may be lost. On really long falls like those of 2 to 4 measures, establish the pitch, hold for 3 to 4 beats, and then fall evenly for the desired duration. If you decide to depart from the basic hold half, fall half rule, everyone should mark the note indicating when the fall should start and end. This timing is critical on long falls, and everyone must stay together. Listening to your lead player will also help keep the falls together and provide greater unity of sound throughout the band. Also be sure to maintain volume throughout the entire fall.
A drop into a note is closely related to the short fall. It's done in much the same way, except that you don't establish a definite pitch when you start, and at the end you land on a written note. The drop starts anywhere from a third to an octave above and a half beat before the written note. When playing the drop, it's critical to land on the written note at exactly the right time. It's easy to hit the note a little early or a little late, so just focus on the written note as your rhythmic target.
The doit is the same as the fall, except rather than forcing the pitch down, the pitch is forced up. It's quite common in big band music, but also heard frequently in cartoon music, motion pictures, and TV commercials. Depending on the music or your conductor, the doit may end at a specific time, but does not land on a specific note or pitch. For reeds, the doit is played by establishing the pitch, maintaining a firm embouchure and breath support, while ascending chromatically and slurring the notes. Brass players establish the pitch and slur up, also maintaining a firm embouchure and breath support. While doing this, the trombones use the slide against the grain. And the trumpets slur up and can also partially depress the valves. Like the fall, it's important to sustain the volume throughout and maybe even increase volume a bit. Doits may not be precise or pretty, but they're fun to play.
The squeeze, which is also called a rip, is performed by sliding up to a target pitch. The starting note of the squeeze can either be an established note or an indefinite pitch. This example shows how a squeeze is written when no definite starting pitch is desired. When a squeeze starts with an indefinite pitch, you'll see an X note head for the starting note. You might also see this as a note in parentheses. It's done on the saxophone with slurred chromatics and no real pitch definition. With the slide on trombone, and with half vowels on trumpet. If the arranger wants a definite starting pitch to a squeeze, he'll write a regular note head. Here's what that sounds like. Rhythmically, the most important note is the target note that you're squeezing to. Here's some examples of squeezes played by the ensemble. Occasionally, the squeeze will come out of a long fall. In this case, simply combine the two effects. Be sure that the change of direction between the downward fall and the upward squeeze is played together throughout the ensemble. And remember to maintain volume throughout the whole effect.
The glissando is a fast run that connects 2 notes together. Usually you wait until just before the target note to start the glissando, and sometimes you'll need to mark when it starts so it'll be played the same by everyone. Now, here's what a glissando sounds like.
This is a standard bend. It's played by establishing the written note, lowering the pitch approximately 1/2 step, and returning to the original pitch, all within the time value of that note. The bend into a note, sometimes called a scoop, begins with the pitch lipped down about 1/2 step. For saxes, bending a note requires a combination of retracting the jaw and sometimes using the fingers. The trombones use the slide, and the trumpets use the lip and sometimes half valves to lower the pitch.
The flip is an effect written for brass players and is basically an exaggeration of the turn. On the trombone, the flip is played using the slide and the lip. On the trumpet, the lip and half valves are used. Listen to your lead player in order to make sure that you match their interpretation.
The proper use of vibrato in the big band depends on the player's knowledge and understanding of musical styles. Early big bands typically used a fast, wide vibrato, which would sound incorrect in more recent styles. Listen to recordings and pay close attention to the subtleties of the vibrato. For reed players, the vibrato is done by moving the jaw as though saying the syllables ya, ya, ya. Trumpet players use either the ya-ya-ya technique or a front-to-back movement of the right hand. Trombone players typically use the slide. When you see the letters NV or dead tone written on your part, this means no vibrato.
The basic shake for brass players is just a lip trill between the written pitch and the next higher overtone on the instrument. That's the next highest note that you can lip up to without changing the slide position or valve combination. For reed players, the shake is a trill between the written pitch and a minor third higher unless otherwise marked. The regular shake as written in this example would be played about as fast as 16th notes, but not in time. When a slow wide shake is desired, it'll probably be written on the part, or the shape of the marking will suggest the slow wide shake. A slow wide shake can be anywhere from a fifth to an octave or more above the written note, and usually speeds up at the end. When a group of players in the band has a shake written, it's important that the speed of the shake is about the same. Try to be sure that releases of all shakes are together. Using a tongue stop here is particularly helpful.
When you see lay back written on your part, it indicates a slight stretching of the time. This is achieved by the horns literally playing figures behind the time, while the rhythm section keeps the time constant. Without this consistency in the rhythm section, what you end up with is dragging. Here are some things to remember. The tempo needs to remain constant. The horn section's got to stay together, regardless of how far they choose to lay back. Lead player's interpretation needs to stay consistent, and section players must follow the lead players. The band will now demonstrate this on a couple of figures. We'll play each one first as written, then laid back. Check out recordings of the Count Basie Orchestra for great examples of laying back.
Subtone refers to a warm, breathy saxophone sound. You can achieve this sound by relaxing the jaw, which will deaden the reed. So listen and experiment. But be careful not to overblow during this technique, because you might wind up with a squawk.
Flutter tonguing is done by fluttering the tongue on the roof of the mouth like this, while playing the written note. It takes a lot more air to flutter tongue a note than to play it straight. Some people can't flutter tongue at all. If you can't flutter tongue, play a growl instead.
A growl is almost the complete opposite of a subtone. This raunchy tone is created on the brass and reed instruments, usually by humming or growling as you play. The interval between the hum and the pitch on your horn determines how nasty the growl will sound. This effect is usually played loud and can be found in a wide variety of music, ranging from Duke Ellington's brass section to your favorite rock sax player.
If you're a trumpet or trombone player, it's not uncommon to see plunger written on your part. This is the only mute that you can pick up at your local hardware store. There are several notations that go along with using the plunger. A plus sign means closed, and an O means open. In the closed position, be careful not to close the plunger too far, or the pitch will change and the note could be lost. Sometimes there's a combination of the plus sign and the O, which means they want a wah type sound. In fact, it might just say wah over the note. Half plunger is another common notation. Cover the bell just enough to get the sound you want. If you don't have a plunger, you can use your hand over the bell instead. Just remember to play through the horn and use plenty of air. Along with the plunger, sometimes a soloist will flutter tongue or growl to get a nastier, raspy sound.
A writer wanting a softer, slightly muffled sound from brass players will sometimes write hand over bell, or HOB. You'll also find plunger notation, the plus sign, the O, and the wah, used to indicate hand position.
When writers want the brass instruments to be played very soft or indirect, they will write in hat or in stand. These effects help keep backgrounds from covering up a vocalist or soloist. Since you're playing soft and leaning forward, be careful not to restrict the airflow. Concentrate on keeping the air moving to maintain a full sound. If your music says in hat and you don't have the right equipment, just play in the stand.
Ghost notes are found in jazz notation and can be written either as an X or a note head in parentheses. Ghost notes are felt rather than heard and can be used to help swing a line. By listening to jazz artists like Charlie Parker and Clifford Brown, you can hear lots of examples of ghosted notes. On the saxophone, you can ghost notes by backing off on the airstream while dampening part of the reed's vibration with the tip of the tongue. On the trombone and trumpet, back off on the airstream while barely playing the ghosted notes. For trumpet players, using half valves can also work.
Now here is Sergeant First Class Vince Norman's Porch Swingin', which contains many of the embellishments and special effects covered in this section. Now that we've covered styles and effects, let's look at how individual players fit into the ensemble. We'll talk about what it takes to be a good section player and offer some specifics for lead players and rhythm players. We also have a few pointers on setting up the band. In short, we'll show you how to get the most out of your big band playing.
A big band usually has only one person to a part. Since only one person is on a part, there's more pressure on you to get it right, which means you have to practice. If you want a good big band, it requires everyone playing at their best all the time.
It really goes without saying that you have to have a pencil and an eraser in rehearsals. Marking your parts with changes and reminders is the most important thing you can do to help you play consistently. Even professionals have to mark their parts with things like cutoffs and key signature reminders. There are some markings that need to be consistent, so when someone else plays your part, they know what is meant. Over the years, musicians and big bands have developed a shorthand for marking their parts, and it works really well. One of the most important things to mark in your parts is cutoffs or releases. Cutoffs are where a note ends. In a big band, notes are usually stopped with the tongue, unlike in classical music, where notes are stopped with the airstream. If someone plays a note too long, you'll hear them hold over. One of the biggest differences between a tight big band and a sloppy one is whether or not everyone cuts the notes off at the same time. Marking cutoffs is easy. Just write a minus sign and then the number of the beat where the note needs to end. With most notes, it's pretty easy to see where it needs to stop. But sometimes it gets confusing. For example, here's a half note, which starts on beat 1 and stops on beat 3. If you needed a reminder for this note, you'd write -3 above it. That means that you hold the note until beat 3. And if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 in your head, the note stops when you reach 3. Sometimes folks get confused and think that off on 3 means holding the note through beat 3, but that's actually cutting it off on 4. Now here's a half note tied to an eighth note. Usually big band writers will do this because they want the half note to be played for full value, so they tie on an extra eighth note to make sure that everyone does that. Pretty sneaky, huh? This usually means cutting it off on beat 3 like the half note we just showed you. Or in slow tempos, you might cut it off on the upbeat of 3, which is its literal value. Then you would write -3.5. Who decides all this? Well, lead players are the ones who make these decisions. If it's unclear where the lead player is cutting off that note or you don't remember, just ask. Then be sure to mark your part so you know where to cut it off every time. Whole notes are often shortchanged. People usually hold them until they feel like stopping. Unless there's a good reason to do otherwise, hold a whole note all the way until beat 1 of the next measure. This is one of the most common cutoff reminders. Another thing you need to mark is dynamics. A lot of times, dynamics are assumed rather than written in a big band chart. Sometimes you won't see any at all. Lead players have to figure out where to add dynamics and communicate that to their section. In a good section, the other players are listening to what the lead player does and they're following it. But that means that the lead player is doing something more than just playing notes. If something is unclear, it never hurts to ask. Sometimes the lead player is trying to figure out what to do, and your input is important in order to reach a decision.
Quarter notes and eighth notes don't always get their full written value, so you might need to mark your parts to help you remember how to play them. Use a tenuto to mark full value notes, and a staccato to mark short ones. A marcato indicates that the note is short and accented. The horizontal accent can be played more than one way. Use your best judgment. If you see a lot of accents on notes that would usually be played short, play them short. Breath marks are also extremely important. Horn parts often don't have obvious places to breathe, so you have to decide as a section where you're going to take breaths. Mark these in with a comma above the place where you're going to breathe. Make sure that you write in accidentals when you miss them. We all miss a sharp or a flat from time to time, but try to ensure that you only miss something once. Circle key signature changes if you're having trouble seeing them or remembering them. It seems obvious, but having a pencil with a good eraser is one of the best things you can do to help rehearsal go smoothly.
The typical block formation for a big band has evolved over the years from bands like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Stan Kenton. There are good reasons why big bands are set up the way they are. Because the lead players set the style for the band, they have to be able to hear each other, and the section players have to be able to hear their lead players. The sound has to get out to the audience with the best possible balance, too. The seating chart we're showing you has the lead players in the middle of their sections and in line with each other. This lets them hear each other. It also means that the section players are never more than 2 people away from their lead player. The trumpets will usually be the loudest section, so they are in the back. The saxophone section is the softest, so they're up front. If the trumpet section is standing on a riser and the trombone section is seated on a riser, each player can get their sound out front and see the director. And that's assuming that the brass players have their bells up and not buried in their stands. It's crucial for proper balance that each player gets their bell pointing up and out to the audience. It might feel comfortable to point your bell at the floor, but why bother playing if you can't be heard? Where the rhythm section sits is particularly important. The bass player and the drummer need maximum communication, so they need to be close together. The drummer's hi-hat should be positioned in line with the trombones, which lets the drummer hear the horns. A grand piano should have its lid open towards the band, with the piano player's back to the audience. It's harder to see the director this way, but it allows the rhythm section to see and hear each other. The solo chairs, also known as the jazz chairs, need to be closest to the rhythm section. This allows them to hear the rhythm section and interact with them during solos. Also, the second players need to be next to the lead players. In the sax section, the 2 altos are placed together with the lead player in the center, which helps them listen to each other for intonation. The baritone saxophone and the bass trombone often play together, so they need to be in line. This seating arrangement is standard for the vast majority of big bands. If you're not using it, try it out and see if it doesn't improve your band.
Higher notes usually sound louder than low ones. The lead trumpet is the dominant voice in a big band if everyone is playing at the same dynamic level. This means that the lower voices need to play a little louder in order to have a full section sound. Just make sure you don't play too loud and bury the lead player. Be especially careful during soft passages because that's when it's easiest for a lead part to be buried. The sax section can have balance problems if the lead is written for soprano sax. It's easy for the other parts to cover it up because soprano tends to have a thinner sound. Here it is correctly balanced. The lead alto should play out in harmonized passages and back off in the unisons. Having the tenors play louder and the altos softer in unison passages will improve intonation and the overall sound. Good balance and blend is everyone's responsibility. It requires listening across the ensemble. Having the lower section parts play out a bit more goes a long way towards achieving proper balance.
Over the years, big bands have been one of the primary outlets for jazz. Many great soloists from Louis Armstrong to John Coltrane spent the early part of their careers in a big band. While soloists are expected to be unique and creative, they have to blend with their sections. In order to do this, they should match the style of their section's lead player. If you're a section player, listen to the lead player for articulation, cutoffs, breathing points, intonation, dynamics, and phrasing. If you're not sure about how your lead player is doing something, just ask. If you're doing your job as a section player and they're doing their job as a lead player, you shouldn't have to ask too often. Just remember to mark your part.
As you can see, lead players have a lot of responsibility. They have to be able to interpret many different styles and make musical decisions for the section. Good lead trumpet and trombone players should also have a strong upper register and endurance. They need to be able to play in tune, sight read well, have a good sound that'll project, and be able to perform under pressure. Their time and rhythmic feel are extremely important as well. Consistency of interpretation is crucial. In other words, a lead player needs to play things exactly the same way every time. Lead alto saxophonists and lead trombonists are also expected to be good improvisers because they often have solos in their parts. It's a lot to ask for, isn't it? The most important skill for any lead player is the ability to interpret styles correctly. You don't play a chart by Glenn Miller the same way that you would play one by Duke Ellington. There are big differences in vibrato, dynamics, phrasing, rhythmic feel, note lengths, and even instrumental sound. It's up to the lead players to be familiar with these differences and to communicate them to their sections. If the lead players don't make these distinctions, every chart will sound the same. Don't necessarily put the person with the most amazing high chops on lead. Lead players need to be the best all-around musicians in a section. In the trumpet section, it's common to put the player with the best upper register on lead, even if that person has trouble with intonation, style, accuracy, and rhythmic feel. In this situation, consider putting the best all-around musician on lead and having the person with the high chops come in and nail the high notes. Or you could split up the lead parts. Either way, you're making a good compromise towards having the section sound the best it can. While there are 3 lead horn players in a big band, only one can be the primary lead player at a time. Whoever has the melody line at a particular time is the primary lead player. In full band passages or sections involving the trumpets and trombones, this is usually the lead trumpet. That's why the lead trumpet player is positioned in the back and center of the band. It allows everyone to clearly hear him or her. And while the other lead players are directly in front of the lead trumpet for the sake of listening, they also are leading their sections as well. This creates the best conditions for a unified horn section. There are also times where you'll see a small group play within a big band arrangement. For example, you might see a soli section with 1 trumpet, 1 trombone, and 2 saxes, plus the rhythm section. The lead player in this case is the person playing the melody. So follow this lead player like you would follow the lead player in your section. A lot of times it's difficult to hear in these mixed horn groups because you're spread out. Listen carefully to achieve the best balance, intonation, and unity of phrasing. Lead playing is a big job, and it doesn't come easily. Listen to a lot of big bands, particularly the ones that set the style for most of the music we play. This is crucial for a lead player. Check out recordings by Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Stan Kenton, as well as many others listed in the companion guide. Try to figure out what the lead players are doing in these bands. What kind of vibrato do they use? What kind of sounds are they getting? What inflections do they use? How do they articulate, and what do they do with dynamics? If you're playing a chart that's been recorded, listen to it while following your part. Mark in the things they're doing that aren't notated and try to imitate them as much as you can. Eventually, you'll develop your own style, but it'll be a style with a strong foundation.
Sight reading is a critical skill for jazz musicians. Set aside some time each day to sight read something new. Ask your band director if you can pull some charts out of your band library to sight read. Duets are also a great way to improve your reading. As you read, scan ahead of the music to see what's coming next. Don't pick stuff that's over your head for sight reading practice. Start out with easy pieces before moving on to harder ones. Correct rhythm is the most important aspect of good sight reading. Focus on getting the rhythms right while reading. Once you get the rhythms, then concentrate on getting the notes. Everyone can hear if you play a wrong rhythm, but not everyone will know if you play a wrong note. You don't even need your instrument to practice reading rhythms. Just look at a piece of music and sing the rhythms in your head. Improvisation is another important skill in a big band. You have to know all your major and minor scales in every key along with the chords and arpeggios to be able to improvise well. So practice these things along with doing some improvising every day if you want to be a soloist in a big band. You should use a metronome for the majority of your practice time. Try putting the metronome on 2 and 4 while you practice. This will help develop your swing feel by simulating the drummer's hi-hat. Finally, do lots of listening. The more familiar you are with these styles, the better you'll play them. We don't often hear big band music in the popular media, so you'll have to make a special effort to seek it out. There's a list of jazz recordings in the companion guide that will help you get started with your listening.
This discussion of the big band rhythm section deals with fundamental topics that are important for every member of the band. So horn players, don't go away. You might also want to check out the Jazz Ambassadors video entitled The Jazz Band Rhythm Section, which deals with the rhythm section in greater detail.
Keeping time is the primary function of the rhythm section. The bass and drums share this role equally, establishing and maintaining the time and the feel. While a metronome may keep perfect time, it does not create any feel. Creating a good rhythmic feel, which is what gives the music life, should be your goal. The drummer and bass should always lock in on each other's time and feel. Quarter notes of the bass should match the quarter notes of the drummer's ride cymbal. Simplicity is the key. The rhythm section must clearly and concisely state the time and the feel in order to be interpreted by the rest of the band. The responsibility for time and feel is passed back and forth depending on the musical situation. For example, as an instrumentalist is developing and building a solo, the drummer may follow and complement the soloist. During this interplay, it's up to the bass player to keep the time steady for the rest of the band. On the other hand, if the bass player has a written part, for instance, a solo section with the trombones, the drummer would pick up the timekeeping responsibilities.
Being able to go back and forth between subdivisions of triplets and eighth notes is especially important in a big band context. The counting of subdivisions is also important when changing the tempo to double time or half time. In going from a ballad to a double time, for example, the eighth note subdivisions become quarter notes in the faster tempo. When going from swing to half time, the swing quarters become the eighth note subdivisions of the halftime. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and.
In rock and popular music, the snare and bass drum are the focus of timekeeping. However, in swing styles, the focus is on the hi-hat and ride cymbals. In this swing demonstration, the hi-hat functions as a snare drum would in pop music, providing the backbeat. The ride cymbal functions as the bass drum would, supplying the downbeats. Understanding the functions of the ride hi-hat combination is important to the aspiring big band drummer. In addition to maintaining time and feel, cymbals are important for providing changes in texture. Texture changes may be used to highlight changing sections of a tune. For example, change the choice of ride cymbal when the composition goes into another section. Texture changes should occur at the beginnings of sections and should follow the contour of the music. As another example, high-sounding cymbals may be used to accompany high-register instruments. These texture choices will help support each section throughout the arrangement.
The use of brushes is a very unique art form. The possibilities of expression they provide a drummer are endless. From ballads to up-tempo swing, brushes can give beautiful textures and deep rhythm to any groove and are a necessary voice for a drummer's vocabulary, particularly in jazz. We'll give two patterns that can be applied to multiple tempos. Let's take a look first at using brushes for swing ballads. This pattern is called over and under. Starting with the right hand, begin with beat 1 at about the 7 o'clock position on the head. Follow the rim counterclockwise around to about 10 o'clock. This is beat 2. Come to 3 o'clock, tap the and of 2, and return back to 7 o'clock for beat 3. Repeat back to 10 o'clock for beat 4, and return to 7 o'clock for beat 1 again. Here's what the right hand looks and sounds like.
1, 2, 3, 4.
For the left hand, the swing ballad is simply a mirror image of the right hand. Start at 2 o'clock on beat 1, slide over to 9 o'clock, then a little turn over to 5 o'clock for beat 2, clockwise around the rim all the way back to 2 o'clock for beat 3, little turn and back to 5 o'clock for beat 4. And here's what the left hand looks and sounds like. Be sure that the pattern in both hands remains circular. If there are corners, it will interrupt the smooth flow. Now let's put both hands together.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This next pattern for brushes is good for medium to fast swing tunes. Start with the left hand at 10 o'clock on beat 1, slide over to 4 o'clock for beat 2, back again for 3, and again for beat 4. It's that simple. Here's the left hand.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now for the right hand. Begin somewhere between the center and the rim at about 7 o'clock. And just use a regular ride cymbal pattern like this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now let's put both hands together, and just for fun, gradually speed up the tempo.
1, 2, 3, 4.
There are countless other patterns, but these two should get you started and satisfy your need for using brushes. Once you learn these patterns, it's all up to you to decide when to use them. Express yourself.
The rhythm section has a lot of control over the dynamics in the big band. If the dynamics are played properly in the rhythm section, the rest of the band will follow suit. The rhythm section should be as committed to playing dynamics as it is to time, feel, and harmonic support of the band.
So far, we've been talking about how to blend the members of a big band into a tight, swinging ensemble. But the real magic happens when those ensembles become a springboard for creative, spontaneous, improvised solos. In this final section, we'd like to throw out a few suggestions for developing improvisers.
From ancient music to the latest guitar solo on the radio, improvisation has always been a vital part of the human musical experience. One of the many important influences which brought about jazz improvisation was the call and response form of music originated by African Americans in the 1800s. Here's an example of how this has been adapted to the jazz idiom. You may have noticed that we were playing over a blues form during that clip. The blues has had a profound effect on jazz improvisation. Listen to this. Because much of the style can't be notated, it's very important to listen to recordings of jazz greats. This is the only way to absorb the necessary elements of style. For an extensive list of jazz greats, check out the companion guide to this video. When doing your listening, listen with a purpose. Work hard to remember the ideas or licks you've heard your favorite musicians play. As you gain experience, you will occasionally want to transcribe a solo from a recording. Transcribing involves writing down exactly what is performed in the solo and analyzing the artist's approach to the tune. Learning to play it exactly as it was performed is like jumping into the mind of a jazz great. You may be saying, now that I'll be able to get the styles down, how am I supposed to learn to improvise? Unfortunately, there's no quick route. An important first step is to begin scat singing. Scat singing is basically just copying what you've heard on recordings with your voice. It can help you build phrases that feel good without having to worry about the notes. If you can sing a phrase that feels good, you'll be one step closer to playing it. Because when it comes right down to it, it's most important for what you're playing to feel good. Kind of like this. You can scat sing while driving in the car, scat whistle while walking, or hear the ideas silently in your head. Scat an idea and then try playing it on your instrument. It doesn't matter when you practice your scat singing, just do it.
Jazz improvisation is communication. You can't communicate through speech unless you know the words and speak the language. The same is true with improvisation. In the jazz language, being able to play major scales throughout the range of your instrument is similar to knowing your alphabet. This will eventually allow you to tell a story while improvising. Chords in jazz are based on the major and harmonic minor scales. Let's take a look at how these are used. Most of you are already familiar with the concept of jazz chords or changes. You are now viewing the changes for Satin Doll. What do they mean? Here's how to figure them out. This is the C major scale. Many of the chords in jazz are derived directly from the major scale. Let's take a look. We begin by stacking thirds above the roots of each note in the scale. We continue to do this until we have 4-note chords for each of the 7 notes of the major scale. These are called the diatonic 7th chords for the major scale. Now you see the properties of each of these chords. You should write out all 12 major scales for reference and practicing. Although the note names change, the properties are the same, no matter which major scale you use to do this exercise. In other words, the 1 chord is always a major 7, the 2 chord a minor 7, and so on. When writing out the other scales in this manner, make sure you write in every sharp or flat in front of each note found in the key signature, as you see in the examples on the screen. Now listen to the rhythm section and try to hear some solo ideas over what they're playing. Approximately 99% of the time, when you encounter a minor chord in a set of changes, it is considered a 2 chord from those diatonic 7ths. Also, when you encounter a dominant 7th chord right after a minor chord, it is considered a 5 chord from the same scale. Now let's look at the first 2 measures. Guess what? It's one of those 2-5 changes in the same key. What is the key signature of that particular scale? No sharps and no flats, right? Because if the D minor 7 chord is the 2 and the G7 is the 5, then C is the 1. Now look at the 3rd and 4th measure, E minor 7 to A7. A 2-5 in what key? 2 sharps. Remember, if E minor 7 is the 2, then D is the 1. Now analyze the rest of the changes with your newfound knowledge. This completely analyzed version can be found in the companion guide to this video. Once you've analyzed any new tune, you must practice it. There exists computer software that can be easily set to provide a rhythm section background for any song at any tempo. Some other excellent resources are the play-along recordings listed in the companion guide. We also encourage you to get together with your rhythm section whenever possible. The key to learning to improvise is to take it slowly. If you don't have access to these materials, you can work with just your metronome. Be sure that you set the tempo no faster than 100 beats per minute. Stick with the normal tempo for ballads since it's usually under 100. Practice your improvisation by choosing any tune and listening to a jazz artist perform it. Now focus on the melody and then the roots of the chords through playing a bass line. Connect the 3rds and the 7ths to create half-note guide tone lines. And finally, just play what you hear. This is a great spot to incorporate ideas you have acquired through transcription and scat singing. This format is also included in the companion guide. Be very careful to play with good time and with a good sound. You now have the tools to begin your journey towards becoming a knowledgeable and creative improviser. We wish you luck on your journey.
We hope you've enjoyed this look inside the big band, and hopefully you've picked up a few insights you can use in your playing and listening. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to write us at the address on your screen. We also encourage you to visit our website. Remember, that's where you want to go to download the big band chart and booklet that go with this video. In fact, you might want to bookmark that website and go back every once in a while to check out our tour itinerary. We really would like to see you next time we play in your area. Until then, keep on swinging.
3 days of snow back in Birmingham, and I thought you were wondering where I am. So I dialed our number all night long, and I got no comfort on the telephone. Ran out, booked me a midnight flight. I thought a little love might make everything alright. Landlord told me that you moved away. Yes, you left me all of your bills to pay. Look out, baby, I think you made your move too soon. fiddle chords, and I found out life in Vegas sure ain't hard. So I ran things up to about 50 grand, and then I cashed it in and held it high in my hand. This kind of word sure can't get around and make a lost lover become found. I heard you knocking last night on my door. Well, I changed my locks. You don't live here no more. Too bad, too bad. I think you made your move too soon. Been to Ohio. I ain't one to get in the news, but I'm just a woman that you gave the blues. Take my love anywhere. Come back next year to find out they still care. I got one love ahead, I got a love behind, I got one on my arm and one always on my mind. Too bad, too bad. I think you made your move too soon. Too bad, baby.